Does it just feel like games of Commander are just longer these days? Sometimes it's not just about someone taking too long to make a decision. It just feels like there's too many triggers happening. So many things trigger on the second spell being cast. So many things make a treasure. So many things just do other things. Alongside player decision making in and out of the game, a lot of things combine to increase the general length of the game, allowing for people to get rather salty, wanting to just go after the player that's taking forever to make their decisions, but they don't realize they're also contributing again to the length of an increased game. And in today's video, I wanted to take a look at such factors. Why are games taking so long in Commander these days? Are they good and bad? And how we can generally look to reduce some of this while also acknowledging this is just a natural evolution of design and where the format is going. It all started from this Reddit post. Does anyone else just attack the player who's taking the longest turn? Most of the time, I probably try to do proper threat assessment, but if someone is habitually taking long turns, I'll often just choose to swing at them. Taking a lot of game actions roughly correlates with those who are the threat anyway. Does anyone else do this? Sorry, I'm a raid boss and you hit the enraged timer. And there is a bit of a mixed bag here. You know, someone taking a lot of game action correlates to being the threat, but some of this might just actually come down to people having to take longer to make certain decisions. There's a lot of things happening on their board, a lot of things trigger. Sometimes they might be, you know, missing some triggers and wanting to go back because that changes their decision, or they have one more mana of that they thought they didn't have. All of this comes together to just keeping track of complicated board states, and it comes with a variety of factors. There are so many things that increase game length, and part of this is actually with current Magic the Gathering design. A lot of current Magic cards just really take advantage of the niche things in the world. Like, for example, we recently had a Y'shtola that doubles up on end step counters. We had the we had the prevalence of more upkeeps as well, manipulating certain phases. We've had cards like ninjutsu that could bring in attackers in the middle of combat, but also can manipulate unblocked attackers at end of combat phase. Like, the time at which you can interact with your opponent, interact with yourself, and just do anything is so diverse in a game of Magic. And then when you double up on those things, when you give people more opportunities at those times and give them advantageous moments, people are going to continue to do that. I mean, again, take a look at the phases: untap, upkeep, draw, and then pre-combat main, play out your creatures, play out your lands, you know, do anything you generally want to do. But the combat phase, again, is so diverse. You have the beginning of combat. So that means you're no longer in the main phase. You can't cast sorceries. You can now do things before your opponent goes to attacks, which is very relevant because maybe you didn't want to remove a creature and then your opponent goes to play something else that you generally didn't have the answer to that may or may not have haste. So you let them go to their beginning of combat and you answer them there. And then you go to declare attackers, which means something, and then some things happen on attack triggers. You go to declare blockers, give your opponent the last chance to do anything, like a last minute buff on an infect creature, and then you kind of deal damage to something. As I mentioned with something like ninjutsu, you can then, once it's unblocked, kind of bring it back. But then you have first strike damage, actual damage, end of combat is still an actual phase, second main phase, end step cleanup, and then you get into more complicated aspects where once you have your cleanup of your hand. So for example, if you have 8 cards in hand, and then we recently had a common actually get printed that says, whenever you discard a card, you deal 1 damage to an opponent. So technically when you're discarding to hand size, that actually triggers. So you go to your end step, you discard a card to that because you have 8 cards in hand, that actually re-triggers that card and creates a new end step, right? That creates, a new cleanup step. That gives you a new opportunity to interact in that kind of end phase. So there's so many parts that come together where when players are really manipulating the most opportune time, you can start to see how game length really increases because players aren't really paying attention. They're just like, oh, wait, what are you doing? And they're confused because it's supposed to be the end of turn. All of this comes together to some key specific places where I find the most length is taken in a game of Commander. Where does time stretch the most? It's going to be 3 phases. So first of all, I'm going to look at tutors, and specifically it's going to be restricted tutors. Now, generally when you vampiric tutor or you demonic tutor, you generally know what you're getting for. Those are catch-all tutors. Vampiric tutor is going to put on top of your deck, but instant speed, you're going to be able to kind of generally do it on end step, or you might have like a draw effect on the stack and you vamp tutor. Demonic tutor, again, just puts it right into your hand. So generally speaking, it's just Demonic Tutor and these tutors just end up being one like the exact card you want in that moment, but just like costing 1 or 2 more. That's the tax of a tutor. You pay, you know, maybe for a 4 mana card, but then to Demonic Tutor it, you just pay 6 mana in total, right? You pay 2 for the tutor. And so that becomes a little bit, you know, more simpler, right? You're looking for a line, you know what you want a counter spell, or you want an interaction piece, you want a second piece of your combo, you want a creature, whatever it is, you know what you can find with those tutors. But when it comes to restricted tutors, I find stuff like Green Sun Zenith really complicates it for people, because then this is where you start to lose some of the timing. People start to forget with like a couple of mana doublers out, or cards that are specifically enchanted onto a specific land that is doubling up or tripling up the amount of mana that's producing. All of a sudden, you know, Green Sun Zenith is an X spell, so you're having to like, you know, you're having to do the, you know, the thing that you see like variant franchise TCG players doing when they're thinking, like, I'm sorry, thinking, and they're just like aggressively tapping the table. Like restricted tutors like this, I find lead to that, because not only Green Sun Zenith is a great example of this, specifically it's an X spell, so you're counting up. Second of all, it's a green creature. So if you're playing Green Sun Zenith in outside of a mono green deck, you're really having to think for the fact that, you know, there may be a creature that you're looking for, but it can't be the blue creatures. So then, you know, if you're playing a deck for the first time and you may not have Goldfish it, then you realize like, hey, wait, I can't actually grab that. That's not the answer I want. So I actually need to go back on Green Sun Zenith. So now all this time you spent on Green Sun Zenith isn't actually what you want to do. So I find that the restricted tutors actually lead to more of this because maybe they're grabbing a specific type of card. Maybe it's just an instant or sorcery, whatever it is, specifically a card out of your sideboard. Maybe that's a little bit more something you can plan for in a 1v160 card. In Commander, that's not possible without a Rule 0 discussion, but regardless, restricted tutors are a big one. Next up is going to be complicated board states, and I'm going to represent this specifically with Muldrotha, just because this is a card during each of your turns. You may play a land and cast a permanent spell of each permanent type from your graveyard. If a card has multiple permanent types, choose one as you play it. So if it's an artifact enchantment or an artifact creature or whatever, like you choose that to be your artifact, you can then choose another creature. Now, Muldrotha is really interesting because it's all about sequencing a lot of the times, right? A lot of things that you're returning probably have ETB effects. There are cards that have leave the graveyard effects. There are cards that care about when you cast something from anywhere other than your hand. Like there are different things that are happening in this deck that you want to sequence in the right order. Cards that care about cards entering your graveyard when they're on the battlefield, but then maybe you want to actually optimize and play another card in advance where you get less value, but maybe you start to gain some life or draw a card and something like that. And so Muldrotha having that out really leads to some complicated board states in terms of sequencing, finding the right land or playing a creature first, but then you can't really do that because that makes it so you have less mana. So maybe you cast an X spell for slightly less, which makes it so that you actually can't get over top of an opponent's creature. But if you do that, then you can play a land and then you have a creature to then trigger this card. And so sequencing all matters. And these are the type of things that generally, again, lead to more complicated board states. When you give a player more options, it generally takes more time to resolve all of the possibilities in that decision tree. The last thing is just going to be engines. And so this is a very common thing, not only in Commander overall, but you're looking at mid-level Commander in the bracket 3 area, the vast chasm that it is. Cards like Ristic Study, I think, are a great example of this. This is an engine in and of itself. It's just a card draw value source. Mystic Remora similarly, but maybe engines that trigger multiple things. So when you drew a card, okay, I actually draw a card, and then I draw a card, I actually make a treasure. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield, I do this, and then when I make a treasure, I do this, and so whenever these triggers start going off, you start to see multiple things start entering the stack. And you have to resolve them properly. A lot of Commander players forget that there is a way to resolve things. There is an active player, non-active player order in which you need to be resolving things, and it allows you to be most optimal. It actually serves the player best who's in last place, because then the players in front of you generally should be reacting first and using their interaction to maybe stop the spell on the stack or stop the trigger, stop the ETB, whatever it might be. They are the ones that are maybe looking to remove something else. And then you are the ones saying like, hey, you know what? I didn't have anything anyway. And you're just lying, right? Like you did have a remove spell, you did have something, but you let everyone react in turn order. But the thing is, when you start to introduce that, like you start caring about like those interaction points in like a casual game of Commander, like a bracket 3, maybe even a bracket 4, like a low power bracket 4 or whatever, that's when it starts to increase the time, right? When everyone isn't necessarily being optimal, when everyone is just trying to go about creating these crazy big engines, and they start playing all these big creatures, and because you played a creature with power 4 or greater, I draw a bunch of cards or whatever, then it starts to get a little bit ridiculous. And that is where I think like CDH is actually a good jumping off point here, because CDH is like a good example of how, yes, we have this extreme example of like 11-hour games. And this is actually an issue with a lot of things happening outside of the game. And that's like the filibustering, the kind of politics, the back and forth of what someone is doing versus what they can do, the possibility space of what they have based on their mana and the amount of cards in their hand. That's a lot of the politicking that happens in CDH that leads to these 11-hour games. But one thing that happens in CDH that a lot of people love to kind of go through is like very complicated stacks. So, you know, we're going to go through this one right here that I found on TikTok that I thought was absolutely great. Let's just watch it through.
A card trigger and attempt to have to exile the voice.
Mystic Gamora trigger.
Yeah, you got it.
I will hold priority on the trigger. I'll lose 2 life and show you a mental misstep.
Mystic Gamora trigger.
You may draw.
Draw.
I have response to the mental. I will pay 2 life and show you a mental of my own.
I have a Mystic Remora trigger and a Monologue Tax trigger.
And there's a VV and a Berg trigger as well.
I'll lose my one from Vivi.
Yeah, I'll cast a Fierce Guardianship targeting Hidden's mental misstep.
All right, I have a Mystic Remora and a Monologue Tax trigger from you.
You got it, dude. I pass on all of your triggers.
Make a treasure for Monologue Tax and draw from the fish. I have a Pact of Negation, and I'd like to target the Fierce Guardianship.
Sure.
And so this is more of an extreme example. This isn't an, harp against CDH or anything, but this is one of those situations where in Eternal Magic in general, games can be very quick, but they kind of lean into more decision making because the possibility space within a smaller time frame is so much more increased. Whereas in newer and newer formats, as you go from modern into pioneer into standard, you generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, have a longer amount of time to make the same amount of decisions. But as you go into eternal formats where spells start to become more efficient, more free, this is when you can start making more decisions earlier on, because not only is your card quality a lot higher and you can do a lot more busted things, but your opponent can then answer with the same level of decisions. And so this is where decision making really does matter, and the turn order really does matter and can add to time. But that's what's really important in the level of CDH. When you're playing to a metagame and everyone is trying to win at all costs, everyone is doing the most efficient thing possible. And generally speaking, games can go, yes, to an hour, but they can be very short. They could be 15 minutes, they could be 20, they could be 30 minutes. And a lot of that might be, people getting up to that point of having enough interaction, going off in a crazy stack situation like this. And someone may not necessarily be trying to win at some point here. It looks like, it started with the removal spell, bunch of draws, a bunch of mental missteps to counter everything, Fierce Guardianship, Pact of Negation, like so many things like just were introduced in this one stack. I'd love to see the whole context for the game. But stuff like this adds to the length of a game when you're thinking about it from the perspective of anything underneath at bracket 4, bracket 3, 2, and 1. This is where it starts to get really hard, because generally at those lower levels, as you go down, maybe people are playing less and less interaction, or their interaction is, maybe less meaningful, less targeted. They're not catch-alls per se. And so maybe it matters less in the extremes of the low end, but the middle, like, once you stop streamlining your gameplay, and yes, you can have interactions, but if everyone is some type of interactive deck, it can start to get really frustrating. But in your average game of Commander, not everyone is going to be a control deck. So I think you're fine to just move forward with it. So how do we generally fix this? Because even past that, all the things in the game, you can have outside game distractions. Shout out to Nerdvana Games. Every so often, when I head over there, I'm playing with one of the employees of the store, Ian, and every time I'm playing with him, obviously he's the one on staff there. So we might be in the middle of a game and someone comes in, he's got to go check them out. And so, that's fine. My man's got to go do his job, right? So in those situations, you can't stop that. You just hang out in the game. You just have a conversation amongst yourself. And that's where an expectation is set. Maybe you tell someone hey, I have an important call that I'm waiting for. We can start this game, but if I get that call, I got to step away. And that's setting that expectation oh, I got that call. It's a good time to pause. Maybe everyone else is thinking, oh yeah, this is a good time for me to go get a smoke break. Oh, this is a is a good time for me to use the washroom. This is a good time for me to, well, I'm gonna go continue sleeving up a deck I was kind of working on. And so this is like where people have that mental preparation of like what they can do, and they also know the amount of time that generally someone's looking for. And so when it comes to outside of the game and its distractions, a lot of times, you know, put the phone away, get involved in the game. But if you are kind of expecting something, maybe someone's coming to the store and you're an employee there and you're looking out for that, or you have a call or just something that you generally have to look for. Maybe you have to take a medication at a specific time, set that expectation. Everyone, I'm pretty sure if you do, you communicate clearly, everyone is generally going to be okay with it. And then again, they will have an expectation of maybe something that they can do at the same time, you know, in that same respect. So what can we then do to fix some of this? Now that we know we have solutions for outside of the game, and you know how CDH goes about all these interactions that once it starts trickling down can get really complicated and add to the bugginess of a game, how do we solve that problem? Well, let's represent it in 4 specific cards, right? The cards themselves I'm going to show, it's more so for like the name and not necessarily the card itself. Firstly, it's going to be kind of think tank itself, getting down to, you know, planning out your turns, especially in the early game. It's just going to be like land pass, land soul ring, fetch for a surveil land, you know, something like that, right? Like it's going to be some type of land go. Once you start getting into maybe that turn 3, turn 4, like people are casting mana rocks, they're casting their first creature, they're casting their big ramp spell, stuff like that. Like you're still kind of moving forward and you're still thinking in your head at that point, like, okay, you kept a hand of 7 cards, maybe it's 6, maybe it's 5, I don't know, whatever your mulligan rules are with your local play group. You're keeping your hand and you have a plan in mind, right? Like a lot of, especially games at the bracket 3 and bracket 2 level, you generally have an engine that you want to build about, especially once you get to bracket 4. Like you have a clear idea as to how you're going to win the game. It's going to be Thassa's Oracle this, it's going to be combo that, or assemble this type of board and tutor for Crater Hoof, like whatever it is. Like you generally have a plan there, but especially at bracket 3, you have like a thing that you want to do with your deck, right? Whether it be a win condition or just like, I want to play my commander and then do this. And you need to think about that ahead of time in the sense of like, okay, I have this hand, so I'm going to go land, then mana rock on 2. Then I play a land again. I'm at 4 mana. I'm going to play this ramp spell. Like you need to be planning that out and doing that quicker. And then you can even tell people like, hey, like on my turn, I'm just going to do this and pass, especially like in tables where you're not playing against like an annoying control blue player. Like you can just be quick about it. And what's nice about stuff like that is a lot of times in a general open metagame, like when you're nonchalant, you're like just chill, you're like doing random things, you're just saying, hey, I'm just gonna do this and pass. Like a lot of people, like they take that energy and they just like kind of move on. Like they're not really looking at you with the threat, even though they should, because you just cast a 4 mana green ramp spell, which means when you untap next turn, if you play another land, you're potentially at like 7 mana. Right? Like you're at a huge jump in mana from like where everyone else is, allowing you to multi-spell better. And so again, like when you make these type of decisions and you think ahead and you do a little bit of what we're going to talk about in a second, you can plan out your moves, you can be clear and concise, and it gives you more headspace to then think about what your opponents are doing, because you've already thought about what you're doing. You can then pay more attention to that random engine piece that your opponent's trying to sneak in, and you know they played really quietly because the other 2 players are talking all of a sudden. You're like, hold on, wait, what is that card doing? And then all of a sudden the other 2 are paying attention, right? And so these are the ways that you bring attention to things because you've given yourself the time to think about them. Next up is going to be streamlining your plays, but then also this is kind of going to mix into the next bit here, but streamlining your plays in the sense of with deck building and your combo, you want to try and like remove some of the fluff. And generally speaking, in a game of Commander, your goal is to win the game, right? It generally should be. That is any goal in a game of Commander. Even if you're doing the thing, you're streamlining your way into that. Don't complicate it and just go for it. If your opponent has the interaction, now you know, or maybe you already are aware of that type of player that's doing it. And so you're thinking in your head, just like when you're planning ahead, the next step in that evolution is like, how do you make sure all the pieces align for you to get there? Maybe you egg on one of the other players like, oh yeah, I know you want to do the fun thing. No, do it. That's going to be so cool. You do it. And then all of a sudden that gets countered. And then it gives you the time and the space to go about your turn and just play out the thing instead of being like, oh, I'll play this, maybe bait, get the counter spell, and then you're complicating it. Just streamline it, play out your game plan, go about it, just be the threat if you need to be. A lot of times at lower level tables, people aren't playing that much interaction anyway. They may not have the exact answer. They might team up against you. And that actually speeds up the game as well, because then once you start becoming that threat, if you have the ability to defend yourself, great. But then the other players are coming together and they then have a concerted plan of like, hey, we got to start to take this down. And then you open up a conversation like, wait, hold on. Yeah, you know what? You're right. You do have to stop this. But then if you stop this blood mood, if you take this blood mood away from me, all of a sudden that 5-color Kenrith player over there, their whole game opens up. So if you go to remove it, maybe you want to remove it on their turn. Maybe you want to go past the Kenrith player and do that. And then you know what? Like, this is extending the length of the game, but it's actually moving the game forward in your favor. You're actually not spending dead time just thinking. You're actually swaying people in your favor, which is part of the game. That's important. And so this is what you want to make sure your game's going to. This is what leads to the interesting games. This is what leads to the thought-provoking ends and people just being less salty in general. Next up is just the next line of streamlining your gameplay, but also just your deck building. And of course, this is where you're going to be looking at the 3/3 Elks, the Trinket Mages, Salubrious Snails of the Commander content creation world. And you're looking at them to be, finding tips and tricks on how to better streamline your deck building process, making sure that you don't have too many themes in your deck, that you are honing in on 1 to 2, whether that be themes or just 1 to 2 combos, and you're building consistency into them. You generally should be building your commander decks around 1 or 2 things, right? Whether that be going off with the commander or going off with the style of win condition. Like, I'm going to put a bunch of 1/1 counters onto a massive board and go at it. Okay, you want to build a massive board, you want to put a bunch of 1/1 counters on it. Don't start building a mill sub theme. Don't start putting flying on everything. Don't start worrying about graveyard recursion, or maybe a little bit, but like you're not a reanimator deck all of a sudden, right? Like, focus in on a set plan, build in some protection spells, cards that have 1/1 counters have indestructible, or like, phase out your whole board, like whatever it is, right? Build that in and really hone in on a plan. And that's going to allow you to streamline your gameplay and also kind of think ahead, because your plan stays a little bit more narrow and succinct. You have some interaction that plays to that plan, and you're still building forward on building your board, building your combo, developing your mana, whatever it might be. You are built in that way where you are streamlined to try and do the same thing over and over again. My Grixis Initiative deck back there that I always love to bring up with Obeka Splitter of Time, the way I built it is I always want to try and be at 4 mana on turn 3, right? Like, my general plan is always mulligan to 2 mana, a 2 mana rock and like 3 lands. So I can go land, 2 mana rock, land, play Obeka, turn after that. I still have 4 mana. Even if I don't hit my 5th one, I still add 4 mana, and I can play, generally speaking, a 4 mana like initiative creature. I've drawn some amount of cards. Maybe I've drawn some type of consistency. Maybe I've drawn a land. I can play a 5 mana one. That's generally how I'm mulliganing and looking to make my decision. That is the game plan at all times. Once I do that once, I don't need Obeka anymore, and I can just ride out the value of the initiative, bouncing around the table, retaking it, and all that stuff. Once I start getting the last one of the initiative, I just go about like my game plan for that. That's my game plan. That's how I built it every single time. The consistency, the amount of lands that I have, the amount of mana rocks in there, the spells I have for consistency, that's my game plan every time. And that's what I can mulligan to. Sometimes you don't find those. There's a non-zero chance that you can just find your worst hands. But that's how I built your deck, and that's how you should be looking to do it to reduce the amount of time taken in the round. The last thing is going to be Goblin Shortcutter, and this is going to be kind of along what I was talking about before, where you start doing things ahead, especially with your Mana Ramp spell. This could be simple things like, hey, I have a fetch land. I'm just going to do this on your turn. I'm just going to grab this. It's not going to affect what you're doing. On my turn, oh, you're done. You're just going to search something. Hey, on my turn, I'm just going to play a land and do this. I'm just going to play a land and do this. I'm just going to, play this creature, blah, blah, blah. You can go, right? Like, all these type of things helps like speed up a game. Maybe you're in the middle of doing something. You're just going, hey, I'm just going to do this and pass on. Shortcutting is so important. And that's part of, that deck building. It's all building on each other, right? Like, streamlining your gameplay and deck building right knows that you generally want to go for the same plan every time, or you got like 1 of 4 lines that your deck is generally trying to take. You're on like line number 2, and you know that this is what you need to do to generally get there, while maybe trying to keep open the other 3 lines, generally speaking. And so that comes with like practice and repetition, but also maybe a little bit of kind of practicing in the background, a little bit of goldfishing, if you will, and working through your deck and understanding what you can shortcut and where are those small decision points where maybe you do just hold something back. Maybe the decision point that you are making is affected by things that your opponents are doing. And that's where it kind of comes to, attacking the player that's taking the longest turn. I just hope like after this video, you know, maybe some of these general ideas were something that you're more aware of, but I'm hoping to just, again, put something out there and just get everyone reminded of some of this stuff. I think a lot of people are generally getting better at building their commander decks. They are getting more and more efficient, but I just hope that after this video, you are never in this position where you are stuck being the person taking all the aggro because you're taking the longest turns. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. For bonus points, I would love to actually hear in the comments, what is the card that is getting you to take the longest turns in your experience? Is it some other card that maybe your opponents are always playing? Some card in your pod that always messes everything up and just takes way too long to resolve? I'd love to hear it. No, I don't want to hear a Warp World stories. I get it. That I'm conceding right there. I'm not letting you resolve that. I'm conceding that right there. Or that like green, and 6 blue or like green sorcery that like everyone shuffles all their permanents back in and like puts a bunch of lands in and draws a bunch of cards. Like when it's like stuff like that, like I'm just like, okay, look, are you gonna win after this, or are you just doing this to be haha funny? Anyway, let me know what you think in the comment section down below, and enjoy hopefully having shorter games of Commander.